Okay, this is chapter 53 of The Night Singer. 53. A small group of people had gathered in front of the pile of flowers. Many of the bouquets had started to wither, but new bunches were being added all the time. There was still no sign of Fanny, nor of the blonde woman Hannah had seen that first evening after Joel was found dead, but she pulled out her phone and took pictures of the crowd anyway. Eric nodded, an approving nod, she thought, though she wasn't sure. They hadn't said a word since she had failed to explain herself. Once Hannah had finished taking pictures, they returned to the car. There was no reason for them to stay. The image of Maria and Karina kept coming back to her, and she didn't know what to do with it, nor with the possibility that someone other than Maria was behind the calls, nor that she had completely lost control and shouted at Eric. He started the engine and guided the car out of the parking lot. "I'm starving," he said. "We should get some food." Hannah turned to look at him. "What?" he said. "Arguing works up an appetite. Besides, it's already 2. She swallowed back the tears, trying to escape. "Let me just call Daniel to see how the search is going," she said. "They might need us there." There was no answer from Daniel, so she called Ove instead. He revealed that the search was underway and that there had been no sign of Fanny. Her mother was there and claimed that her daughter had gone to the Maldives. When Hannah explained that they hadn't managed to find Fanny either, he told them to come back to Kalmar. She hung up, wondering whether she should have mentioned what had happened at Maria's, the suspicion that the calls had come from someone else, or the photograph. If she was really honest with herself, she knew she was in no fit state to talk to Ove right now. She needed to find out what kind of relationship Maria and Karina had first. Neither of them could do anything about the threats as long as they remained anonymous. "Ove wants us back at the station," she told Eric. "I didn't bring any food, so maybe we can stop somewhere on the way." She made a real effort to keep her tone light and friendly. "What do you feel like?" he asked. "Don't mind, you choose." As they reached the mainland and turned off the E22, Eric took a right toward the Scandic Hotel inside of the station. He pulled up outside a charcoal grill restaurant called Dylan. "Eat in or take out?" "I'd prefer takeout," said Hannah. She didn't know where she stood with him right now, never mind herself, and the thought of sitting opposite him for an entire meal was just too much. Back at the station, there might be someone else in the coffee room for Eric to talk to. As luck would have it, there wasn't, and when she failed to speak, he began telling her about the Apocalypse book he was reading, saying that according to its author, the way she lived was better than the way he lived. If a large percentage of humanity was wiped out, the towns and cities would quickly become uninhabitable. They weren't built to function without modern infrastructure. Plus, they would quickly fill up with the dead. "I thought you were an optimist," said Hannah. "I am. I just think it's an interesting subject." Hannah hurried back to her desk as soon as she had finished her lamb skewer. She ran a search on Maria but couldn't find anything that explained her relationship with Karina. She didn't dare search the database for any information about her colleague. She was finding it difficult to concentrate, her mind constantly returning to the meeting with Esther's daughter. There was a chance she might leave Hannah in peace now that she had said what she needed to say, though Hannah doubted it. That kind of hatred didn't just disappear. But what about the calls? Those probably had nothing to do with grief and anger over what her father had done and were directed at her personally. Someone felt threatened by her return to the island. Hannah tried once more to force herself to focus on the investigation. Aside from Fanny, Tilde, and Lucas, who knew that Joel would be walking through Guardby that night, all the evidence suggested that Fanny was guilty, but Hannah didn't want to believe it. She would prefer a 43-year-old perpetrator to a 16-year-old girl. Hannah opened the investigation and began reading through the interview notes, call logs, and a few forensic reports that had come in, but she couldn't find any new leads. Someone else was looking into Marcus Johansson, but they hadn't uploaded anything to the system yet and probably wouldn't before Monday. Just to be on the safe side, she sent a quick message to Ove. "Any news on Marcus Johansson?" He replied immediately. "Nope, you'll know as soon as that changes." "Have you changed your mind?" asked Eric. Hannah looked up from her phone, confused. Had he seen what Ove wrote? "About what?" "Coming for dinner. I'm leaving now." Was he joking? Hannah searched his face for a sign, but drew a complete blank. "Do you really want me to come?" she asked. "I can handle being shouted at," said Eric. "Believe me, I've been called far worse." Yet again, Hannah was tempted to use dinner with Ingrid as an excuse, but she knew he probably wouldn't believe her. To her annoyance, she felt herself blush and stared intently at her screen. What she had found out at Maria's had shaken her, and she probably wouldn't be able to breathe calmly tonight, even in Kelva. She might be able to invite herself over to Ingrid's, but unlike her neighbor, Eric had actually asked her to come. That had been before she shouted at him, yes, but she really did need to stop being so pathetically weak. And she still wanted to explain herself. Okay, she said. The look of surprise on Eric's face made Hannah panic. He had probably asked purely because he thought she would say no, but the emphasis he put on the word cool helped to dampen her fears to a manageable level. She logged out and stood up. It was just before 5 when they stepped into Eric and Surprise's apartment in the Varvelhosen area of Kalmar. His daughter Nyla had come running toward them in a pink dress. "Hello, who are you?" "I'm Hannah. I work with your dad." She heard quick footsteps likely drawn toward the unfamiliar voice. Surprise's head only came up to Hannah's chest, but she pulled her into a hug anyway. "It's so nice to meet you." Eric gave his wife a disapproving glance, possibly thinking she was overdoing it. Hannah had been under the impression that Surprise didn't speak Swedish, but she did, albeit with an accent, occasionally muddling her word order. Hannah greeted Surprise's parents, shaking their hands. For some reason, she had assumed they would be wearing traditional Indian clothing, but the only hint of India she could see was the shawl draped over Avaka's shoulders. Hannah never liked being reminded of her prejudices. The only time she had ever left Europe was on a week-long package holiday to Morocco. Nyla went off to play chess with her grandfather while Surprise's mother headed back to the kitchen to cook. Hannah was left in the living room, unsure where to turn. Eric and Surprise had disappeared somewhere. "Come on," Eric told her when he returned, leading her out to the balcony. Surprise handed her a glass of white wine. Hannah's car was still parked outside the station, but she had decided to take the bus home. "Thanks," she said. The view from the balcony was incredible. Being able to see the sea was the one thing she missed in her house, and it was the main reason she walked to the beach every morning. Yes, she saw the water as she drove across the bridge, but it wasn't the same thing if you couldn't hear the waves or taste the salt in the air. Hannah sat down with Eric and his wife, sipping her wine and nibbling nuts. They had managed to talk among themselves, meaning Hannah didn't need to speak, but she still found herself struggling to relax. "How long have you been living in Sweden?" she eventually asked, in an attempt to prove she could do something other than listen. "Almost 5 years," said Surprise. The look in her eyes changed, and Hannah saw a wave of longing pass over her. It felt like she had touched upon something. Eric didn't seem to notice. "And you work as a dentist, right?" Hannah continued. "Yes," said Surprise. "It's probably not as exciting as your job, but today I helped a kid who had knocked out a tooth." "Your work is important, too," said Eric. The look he gave his wife was brimming with love. A sudden realization struck Hannah. She would probably never get to experience that kind of love. She found herself wondering, far more often than she wanted to admit, what life would have been like if she had said yes to Fabian. They might still have been together now, though she doubted they would have been particularly happy. It often took her a long time to realize certain things, but she now knew that it was never Fabian she had been in love with. It was the thought of having someone to share her life with. She looked over to Surprise, who smiled back. Hopefully her longing wouldn't become unbearable. Hannah's phone rang, and when she saw the number was withheld, she hesitated before answering. This time, what she heard on the other end was neither silence nor flames, but a distorted male voice saying, "Get out of here. If you stay, you'll die." She hurriedly hung up. "Is she still calling?" Eric asked. Hannah shrugged dismissively. She knew this might be her opportunity to tell him what she had realized at Maria's place, but she just couldn't do it. Surprise excused herself, saying she had to go to the bathroom, probably in an attempt to give them a moment. Hannah searched for the right words, but no matter how encouragingly Eric seemed to be looking at her, she couldn't manage a single one. He put up with her silence for just under a minute. "There's something you should know about Daniel," he said. "What do you mean?" "He's gay." "Okay." "It's just I've seen the way you—" "Thanks, that's enough." Hannah took a sip of her wine, resisting the urge to press the cool glass to her hot cheeks. Had Daniel noticed too? That was the worst part, just how openly she had been yearning. In a way, it was a relief that he was gay. She had known from the very outset that the attraction was purely physical because of his similarities with Fabian, but she really knew nothing about him, which was now painfully clear. As she tried to smooth over the silence with another sip of wine, Surprise came out and told them that dinner was ready. At the table, everyone switched to English. Hannah's was much rustier than she would have liked, and she felt a little ashamed, though the others didn't seem to care. The food was fantastic and nowhere near as spicy as she had assumed it would be. She mentioned that to Supriya's mother, who laughed. I add less spice so that Eric can eat it. Everyone laughed, even Eric. Supriya's mother began asking questions about Hannah's family, and seemed to feel sorry for her when she learned that she lived alone, that the only family she had was her grandmother, who lived in a home, and her brother in London. Hannah talked up their relationship, claiming that they talked every week. She managed not to mention her parental grandparents. Before long, the wine started to go to Hannah's head. It mixed with the sense of release from her outburst earlier, with the latest call. Her family, too. It was all just too much. I should be heading off, she said. I have a bus to catch. It was an exaggeration. Her bus didn't leave for another hour, but she was banking on Eric not knowing that. The station building was closed, so Hannah sat down to wait in the bus shelter. It was hard not to think about Joel, about the photo he had taken of his bruised, bloodied face. What had happened next? Hannah leaned back and closed her eyes. The voice from the phone immediately came back to her, telling her that she would die unless she left. The problem was that she had nowhere else to go. She opened her eyes in an attempt to get away from the voice. It had confirmed the suspicions she had spent so many years trying to repress, that something wasn't quite right. The fragments she had heard didn't seem to fit. The excessive violence, what little her father had said. She needed to find out what really happened that night 16 years ago. Hannah sent a message to Ove asking whether she could read the investigation into her father. The last day. The moped engine roars, and Joel reacts instinctively, convinced Fanny is about to mow him down. Either that or pull up in front of him so she can hit him again, never stopping this time. So there is nothing he can do about it. Instead, Fanny tears by, kicking out as she passes. Her foot doesn't hit him particularly hard, but it's enough to make Joel lose his balance. He stumbles toward the ditch, only managing to raise his arms halfway. His left elbow takes the brunt of the impact, his cry drowned out by the roar of the engine. Joel is lying on his side in the longish grass, curled up like he had been in the woods, protecting his head with his arms. Without slowing down, Fanny cuts across the road and turns off onto Sniggeton. Joel doesn't dare believe she is actually gone, and he lies quietly in the darkness, listening, waiting. But the pain is all he can hear, the throbbing of his ribs. He has only ever broken a bone once before, when he fell off his bike and landed on his arm, but he doesn't remember the physical pain. All he remembers is the rest of it. Axel telling him to stop whining, saying that only girls whine. How old was he then? 8? Old enough to have started school at the very least, because he remembers the other kids drawing on his cast. No, not kids. The girls. They were the ones he spent the most time with. His life is one big mess. How did it end up like this? Joel has no idea how he is supposed to straighten everything out. He already talks to Nadine, but that isn't helping, possibly because there's a limit to what he can tell her. Some of the things he shares make her feel bad. That's obvious from a mile off. But he understands that. It's Joel she has fallen in love with. Joel knows he should call Tiana, that he should try to apologize and explain himself, though he doesn't know whether he can ever be forgiven. Tina was so upset. A cold gust of wind makes him shiver and he crawls to his feet. Fanny really is gone. Joel is on the verge of crying tears of relief, and he realizes for the first time just how tense he was. Still, he doubts she will leave him and Molly in peace going forward. Not until she gets her money. He should talk to Mom about this too. Ask her for help. The darkness quickly eats up his sense of relief. However bad it was to have Fanny behind him, the worries about what she was going to do, at least the moped was illuminating the road. Almost there, he says aloud in an attempt to fight back the ghost in the darkness. He's just a few hundred meters away from the warmth from his bed. Joel takes out his phone to turn on its flashlight and send a message to Tina. A sorry will do right now. Any explanations can wait, but this time his phone refuses to show a single sign of life.